What's up, folks? My name is Initial Thoughts, and what I hope to do with this initial video here is kind of set the pace for my channel, CryptoCurrently, which I'll be launching relatively shortly after this video. I want to say within the next week. The reason I feel the necessity to start a YouTube channel is this. Currently in the world, we are faced with what seems to be political uncertainty on top of financial unrest, and the only way forward, I believe personally, is through conversation, hashing it out, and really analyzing the facts in front of us and not necessarily overthinking them, but at least using the data to make some kind of conclusion. Because I think what is lacking in our modern population is decisiveness, not necessarily conviction or commitment or even information. All of the tools necessary to make the decisions to move forward in life or do the right thing are at our disposal as human beings, especially in this modern era. And I believe the last hurdle that we have to face personally is trustlessness, or the necessity for trust in a system. Trust is a beautiful thing, but it leaves the opportunity for exploitation. So does corruptibility, or rather the ability to adapt something over time. Our principles as people have been corrupted over time. Our ethos as a population has been corrupted over time. While many people claim that the Bible is a purely positive text, even that has been corrupted over time. What I hope to do as an educator to a degree, but not even an educator, I want to strip myself of any titles here. I'm a person first. I'm a human first. I have some views that some people would consider above the human standard, but I believe ultimately that we have been designed, or have designed ourselves to excel and adapt over time, because we ourselves are the best store of value over time. We can maximize our value. We use tools to quantify our value, but we can maximize our value so long as we know so long as we know what our value is. Now, let me get directly to the point at hand. I believe there are too few people educated on what the reality of Bitcoin is, and what it is for, and what it would alleviate us of as a people. I live in a small town, if you can't tell. I live in a small town with relatively few highly educated individuals. In other words, I consider myself intelligent, but I'm by far not the smartest person in town, nor am I the least intelligent. I have seen varying degrees of intelligence, and I don't think that should determine whether or not you have the requisite information to take care of your family and yourself, simply because of how the language is coded. So in other words, I've spent a good portion of this video already talking in very arduous terms, because this is the way that I process information for myself in my head over time. I don't often have a chance to articulate it this well to anybody, because again, I don't often have people who can even digest what I'm saying quickly enough for us to have a pertinent conversation. And with this being a YouTube video, I have the opportunity for people to go and listen to it, and listen to it thoroughly to the degree of scrutiny, and help me parse out things that I might be regurgitating from a standpoint of brainwashing, maybe manipulation, indoctrination, or things that are resonant and true throughout the entirety of the population. So with that being said, what is Bitcoin? What is the function of Bitcoin? I think this is the number one question that is the most elusive, but yet the most important, because nobody seems to ask it when they want to talk to me about it. They immediately have suppositions that it could be a scam. They immediately have the reaction to say, well, anything can have arbitrary value. And I just don't really think a lot of people have gone through the purification process to really understand what it is that currency is in the first place and how value is derived in the system. So again, I'm going to, and I don't know if I said this, this is my second take, I won't lie. I tried it once, it was a little awkward, the lighting wasn't right. This is my second take. What I honed in on the first take was that not everybody has the opportunity to think through in depth what the function of Bitcoin is. Many people assume that the function of Bitcoin is similar to the function of regular currency. This is and I say many people that are skeptical of Bitcoin seem to think that it will simply have a similar function as fiat currency, that we will most likely be transacting in everyday transactions with Bitcoin primarily. I personally do not believe that this is the case. I believe Bitcoin is inherently designed to store the value of the work that generated it. In other words, I think that proof of work is probably the most revolutionary concept that has not been explained well enough. And I'm not very familiar with the history of the term itself, but insofar as it's related to cryptocurrencies and in particular the Bitcoin network, proof of work actually means something very, very I would say almost metaphysical. Proof of work is what determines value of an asset. So, in other words, the reason the analogy of the gold miners works so well in the Bitcoin white paper, and why it translates so well over time in the terminology and in the language, is because it actually plays the same physical relevance. In other words, miners had a resource that was already scarce by definition, because from what I understand and what I've seen, gold can only come from outer space, cannot be made here on Earth. We've tried that, it doesn't necessarily work out the same way. We can take what gold exists, we can reform it, we can't really destroy it, we can dust it down. Okay, so gold's store of value was determined by the fact that it was indestructible, it was incorruptible, it was, and of course they would mix other things with gold to try to I guess inflate the currency in a way, reduce the value of the currency, debase it. But over time, people would hold. Robert Kiyosaki makes the point that he would go through all of the currency to find out which coins were actually true silvers. This is the kind of mindset that true wealth is designed around. Wealthy people really think about these kind of things. So with that being said, gold is scarce. Gold comes from outer space. It's not something that is readily available here on Earth. We as a population have hoarded it because of this very reason. And if you look at some of the ancient texts that talk about visitors from other planets and this and that other type of thing, you'll note that a lot of the ornate sculptures and fixtures that they created that had spaceships were made of gold as well, or whatever resembled gold at the time. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, this is from my very shallow understanding, but that gold can be used in aeronautics and in spacecraft. So I think there's something to be said about the validity, the potential validity that gold might be more industrialized at a certain point, and we might actually have to traverse into space to mine asteroids to get more gold. But this is just the hypothesis. I haven't really fleshed that thought out, but it seems to ring true intuitively. And that, again, that's how I'm trying to tackle this. I feel like with all the external factors that play into the world now, the flood, the constant flood of information, you have to be able to think about the things that are in your head on your own terms. And so, to the point, Bitcoin is also a scarce resource. It's only going to ever have 21 million coins, tokens minted. And excuse me for conflating those two terms, but there's the Bitcoin network itself, which is the fundamental thing you will read about if you read the white paper. It's more about the network's underlying technical structure. the Bitcoin itself is generated from the creation of blocks and the subsequent solving of these difficult algorithms that are done with these ASICs miners. There a lot of technical details there. Point being is that they use very strong, powerful computers to do really complicated mathematical puzzles to solve the containers in which Bitcoins are mined from. Now, over time, the number of Bitcoins available to purchase and have has diminished from mining, which is still a crucial part of the infrastructure of Bitcoin because it's technically still in its infancy, right? And then also from transactions, and then also lost Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin that was retained by Nakamoto. So all of these different avenues have basically converged to create what is known as a market signal. All of these things generate a price for Bitcoin. Now you might ask yourself, well, okay, I understand the function of Bitcoin is something like incorruptible, immutable, unintermediated money, but why would I use that as opposed to gold coins? Well, to move your money across space and time is relatively difficult, okay? If you want to pass down inheritance to your family, the most commonly, in your head, you're thinking, well, I'll give them a car, this, that, maybe, or not even a car, because that's a depreciating asset, a liability, really, if we really want to talk about it. A house, maybe, or land, potentially. Gold is probably one of the safest things you can put your money into. And there's still volatility involved with that, so you would have to be careful. But what I would say is, to store value over time is, virtually impossible. Unless it's in a way that defeats inflation, is unintermediated, so there can't be any laws proposed that prohibit people from transacting in it, and is secure to the point that nobody can take it from you physically. I think many people underestimate what Bitcoin actually is. But many people will say to me, arbitrary value. Let's go back to the proof of work example. The work that is done to generate a Bitcoin is relative to the amount of computer processing power needed to operate against the algorithm. Then also the electricity required to operate the computer against the algorithm, or computers against the algorithm, on top of the dedicated man hours to make sure that the systems are operating correctly and that your mining operation and your electricity are. So you still have to dedicate physical time to making sure that all of your details are running smoothly and efficiently. Now, in the early stages of Bitcoin, it was very cheap and easy to, you mine against the system, you get you some Bitcoin, and it's a done dilly. But now with what is known as the gambler's ruin, what I would call progression, as you go further and further down the line, the algorithms get infinitely more difficult to solve, and so it requires more computing power to solve these algorithms. This is in fact where Bitcoin's value is only partially stored, and I say partially because actually what is a huge part of Bitcoin's value is its security from intermediation by a third party, and it's cryptographic security. So not only is it virtually impossible, as I heard it put in a conversation I heard with Jordan Peterson and a few others, the Bitcoiners Book Club, a very good episode of Jordan's podcast. Gigi specifically touched on how if Bitcoin is properly secured, there's no way you can steal it or take it, or anybody in the world could transact with your Bitcoin. It's not possible. Let me make it more clear for purposes of explaining. The 12-phrase key, the private key that you have to basically encrypt your passwords and your... Dang, there's a lot of mosquitoes. Hold on, yo. Let me see if I can smoke them out. Oh my gosh, y'all see that? Oh my gosh, I'm really big, son. They're gonna take me out. Let me put my sleeves back on. The security from the third party. If you happen to encrypt this, you take your phrase, you put it in your brain, and you never tell anybody, and then you put all your Bitcoin in a ledger, and you bury the ledger in the most random location that you only know the geological coordinates to, latitude, longitude, depth in the ground. Nobody can ever steal your Bitcoin. Nobody can ever take your wealth. Nobody can ever diminish what you have stored and what you've worked to build. Now, I'm a little all over the place. This is my first video, so bear with me. And don't blame this because I just got home. It's not this, I promise. There comes a point in time where every person has to decide whether or not their individual sovereignty is worth the extra effort. I have long since decided, and I think what maybe I hadn't realized before is that I have always been an anti-establishment. I consider myself a centrist, so I purely believe that freedom is something that, while inherent upon each person, is also coupled with responsibility. And I don't think that is something that is intermediated between anybody, but let me rephrase that. I think that came out kind of messy. I don't think that the relationship between individual sovereignty and freedom, responsibility. So the relationship between freedom and responsibility are mutual. They don't exist without each other. I think one of the fundamental principles of the universe, dualism, says that everything exists with a codependent, or I guess you could call it a coefficient. I don't know. I'm not that I'm not good with all these terms like that. It has a second half. So when you look at any kind of anecdote about power, we all know the common one. I didn't want to use it, but with great power comes great responsibility. And the greatest power that you can invoke as a human being is your freedom, your individual sovereignty. Because when you decide to interact as an individual, you are more capable to do what you think would be of the benefit of everyone. So let me take myself for an example. I don't know that I am designed to work a 9 to 5 at Walmart, or as a tax preparer, or as an educator, a teacher at a school. I don't know which of those I might be more inclined to do that would make the best impact. So I don't know how do I make a determination other than to say, what does society value most from me? This is part of the problem with the fiat currency, is that it doesn't reflect the value that society necessarily has for you as a person. I feel like I could contribute very well as an orator, as a speaker, as somebody who talks to people, but at the same time, that requires me to be humble enough to put myself out there and allow people to criticize my opinions and my positions. So part and parcel of why I'm starting this channel, like I said, or maybe I'm thinking about the first one, the first attempt, that is, part of the reason I'm starting this channel is to help parse out the thoughts that I have, and the attempt to make my thinking more aligned. And today I thought about alignment as something like hashing out the bandwidth from point A to point B. I had a very insightful conversation before work today with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how the market signal is, as Robert Breedlove coined it, or as eloquently put it, that is, it is the consensus of people across space. It is, without me being in the same room as you, being able to argue with you about what the price of something should be, and that happens across the world simultaneously like that, because our markets fluctuate constantly. And the reason it's fluctuating so constantly by decimals is because the opinion is shifting in our heads as well by fractions of a dollar every day. And so in certain cases, we're left to basically try to hash out what the market values of us the best, so that we are spending our number one resource, our proof of work, which is time. And, people don't understand that is your time is the most valuable currency you have. So you spend that to then get money, because you want to use that money as an intermediary to transact for things you might need in the future. But when your money isn't worth anything because of inflation, or because of what shrinkflation, as they call it, or any of those terms, any of those thoughts that come into your head, like, well, yeah, taxation does kind of steal my money. It's like, yeah, we've been saying taxation is theft since 1776. We threw the T in the harbor for a reason. We were tired of getting taxed for every single transaction, every single thing, even getting paid now. So we went from revolting against the government, saying, hey, we don't really agree with you being able to tax us on every single transaction that's made, to basically being complicit with it, to say, it is getting me a school and a road here and there, and I don't know if I'd otherwise be able to afford it. That's what community is for. That's what the local level is for. You want to be able to go to the people around you. Let's say, when I moved into the neighborhood I'm in now, the roads were atrocious. Well, the first thing I said was, being a proactive-minded person, I would guess, was, hey, I'm gonna start an HOA over here, raise some money so we can get these roads fixed. And I shit you not, within less than 2 months, I want to say 3 months, the city had already beat me to it. Like, they heard my conversation. They probably were already planning to do it, let's be honest. Somebody had already probably had the same thought I had before, I just moved into the place. Nonetheless, an opportunity for me to engage in political discourse with the people around me was essentially just stamped out, because the city already beat me to it. And I think that's part of what, we outsource ourselves to the government. We do not want to take individual responsibility to make sure that we can be taken care of, or be safe, and I think that's a huge reason why firearms are important. That is taking the responsibility of your own protection, just like taking up a martial art. That is taking up the responsibility of your personal well-being. And in the same sense, I feel like, and though I'm not a very religious person, I feel like if you take God, you take Bitcoin, and you take firearms, those three things are the trifecta in which freedom is found. The reason they're so controversial, and you might say, well, how is religion controversial? Since the beginning of time, religion has been controversial. But more contemporarily, you can see how modern ideologies actually don't make room for the conversation of God, really. Going back to layer ones and base layers, I equate God to consciousness, and I equate consciousness to the base layer of the universe. So when people say God, they mean the fundamental base layer of the universe, the thing that cannot show its face because it is everything. You would be blinded by it because it would be so magnificent, you wouldn't be able to comprehend it. And it's the same concept exists when you talk about freedom, because it's the fundamental thing in which people enact in. The choice whether or not to do for their own well-being. And so, without trying to belabor the point, I didn't want to make this a 30-minute video. I think what I aim to do with CryptoCurrently as a podcast or journal, I don't know how I want to approach it. I think I'm going to call it a podcast for now. What I hope to do with it is elucidate amongst everybody that I can what feels to me the best course of action. Because when I talk to people about what to do and what they feel like should be done, I get very similar answers. I don't know, or I get these very microscopic solutions that don't really yield any potential victory in the long run. It's a good thing to grow your own crops, but the government still has a monopoly on everything. And I think with the advent of decentralization, I think the people will kind of take the responsibility back into their own hands. I feel privileged to be a part of a crypto community in the grand scheme, because it at least makes me confident that there are people on the planet who value self-sovereignty and independence and personal liberty enough so that they actually go out and enact the steps needed to make themselves free. But and again, I don't think that freedom should necessarily have to be fought for, but without the option of fighting for it, you truly have no freedom. And so, and to that point, fighting any kind of conflict requires weapons and resources. And you can say, well, those are the same thing. I would virtually disagree. But you can't feed your army spears. You can kill everybody in town, and you can take all their weapons, and if you don't eat the food, your army's gonna die. You gotta understand the difference. The resources necessary to fight the war, the technological weapons necessary to actually defend oneself. These are things I want to really I'll expound on in a later video, and maybe I'll start making these a little bit longer once I get my format down. But to summarize, to rehash the points, what is the function of Bitcoin? The function of Bitcoin is to allow citizens the ability to transact outside of a third-party intermediary, what we know as the government. With that being the case, the next question is, why Bitcoin as opposed to pennies, nickels, dimes, dollars, carrots, rabbits, frogs, foxes, chickens? Because Bitcoin is harnessed by natural resources. It takes electricity, it takes manpower, and then you have to use that Bitcoin in a way that makes certain that it's actually being valued. So it's not just arbitrary, well, we burned up a lot of electricity, so it's worth all this electricity. It's also the fact that you have to go and then use your computational data to confirm that you own it. To transact in it requires, in some cases, fees to be left here and there. And so through time, through scarcity, it becomes more of a resource. And what I expect will happen after our lives have transgressed a little bit. I mean, okay, if you're here watching my video in 200, 300 years, thank you very much. I hope I was insightful from day one. I foresee that Bitcoin will be very, very expensive as an individual coin, like $1 billion, almost, upwards of $1 billion per Bitcoin. And maybe not in 500 years, but the trajectory will be there, because the next iteration would be to I said Bitcoin was in its infancy. It's because we're still mining it. Not all of the Bitcoin has been mined. There's still time for people to be miners, but there will come a day where mining is no longer a job or a position and a terminology. It will be an heirloom of the instantiation of the infancy stage of Bitcoin. And with that being the case, there will have to become more use cases for it. And when people are building or using or transacting or revaluing, restructuring the value system based on different levels of mathematics, higher level mathematics, and I might do a separate episode on that, you run into the problem of infinite divisibility, and so you have to make the quantity so that it's divisible, it's reasonable to divide. And so, with that being said, lastly, Why choose Bitcoin now? Just uncertainty is at an all-time high. I personally have recommended to everybody that I know that they should start looking into the potential of using cryptos, and I do mean, Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Shiba Inu, all the way down to some of these like bottom tier tokens. Not necessarily using them, but understanding what they're designed to do, how they're intended to operate, getting more familiar with the technical infrastructure, and then also understanding the philosophical basis to what Bitcoin was designed to resolve. And there are probably some things I glossed over. I'm sure in the comments, if you want to leave something for me to kind of rehash or touch on or maybe expound on, I can. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. I think I want to leave it there. Honestly, this is my first attempt at a YouTube video. I think I tackled it decently, but I know there's plenty for me to work on. I'm not going to go and do another one. I'm just going to enjoy the rest of my night. But this has been Initial Thoughts with CryptoCurrently, and I hope to see you at the next one.